Hi, how are ya? Girl! I don't know why I thought I was gonna serve with this look. Like, I was like, oh my god, yes, I'm gonna serve. It's gonna look so. So as you can already tell, today I'm going to be talking about Studio Ghibli movies. I'm going to be ranking them. Yeah. It's Ghibli or Ghibli? It's Studio Ghibli. If you don't know what Studio Ghibli is, Studio Ghibli is an animation studio from Tokyo, Japan that was founded in June 15, 1985. The founding fathers of Studio Ghibli are Toshio Suzuki, Yasuyoshi Tokuma, Isao Takahata, and Hayao Miyazaki. Now, Hayao Miyazaki is not only famous for producing most of the films from Studio Ghibli, but he's also very famous for his personality.
スタジオの将来もはっきりしてますよ。やっていけなくなります。それはもう目に見えてる。ジブリなんて困ってさ、飛行機の名前で思いついてジブリとか言ったんだから。有名したからね。
これは早く移動するっていう学習させたやつなんですね。
これ面白いと思って見ることできないですよ。これを作る人たちは痛みとかそういうものについてね、何も考えないでやってるでしょ。極めて不愉快ですよね。僕はこれを自分たちの仕事をつなげたいとは全然思いません。極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
Before we start ranking the movies, I just want to let you know that this video will not be an in-depth analysis of every movie. Because if I do that, this video is going to be like 3 hours long. Instead, I'm just going to read to you some of the notes that I took while watching each movie. I'm going to rank the movie from 1 to 10, and then I will place each movie in a ranking category. The categories are the movies that I didn't like at all are going to belong to this category.
Burn it.
The second category is going to be the movies that almost made me fall asleep. The next category is the category of movies that as soon as I watched the movie, I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely a Studio Ghibli film because it has a lot of the reoccurring themes from Studio Ghibli and it has a lot of similarities. The next category is going to be it took a twist for the better. Like I was not expecting the movie to be this good. Next category is so underrated. In this category, I think I placed some of my favorites. I will let you know. But Studio Ghibli has a few very underrated movies that are not as popular and I really enjoy them. And then the top category is my Oscar winners, my favorites, in my opinion. Let's start ranking the movies. So I'm gonna go through the movies in chronological order, okay? First, we have Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. This is literally what I wrote. Star Wars, Pokemon, vegetation, forest at the beginning, so beautiful. Airplanes, scientific research vibes. Final scene and the song was so beautiful. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Now, in the categories, I'm gonna place it on it took a twist for the better. Because throughout the movie had the same pace and then that ending was so beautiful, so poetic, so romantic even. The next movie I'm going to be talking about is Castle in the Sky. I wrote Princess Nausicaä vibes, a lot of European influence. The creator really likes the sky, flying, being above. It's just an observation that I made. Love that they don't have a rooster and the kid needs to play the trumpet. Now, the name of the ship being La Puta, girl. If you don't speak Spanish, maybe you don't get it, but La Puta means I gave it a 5 out of 10. So I'm gonna place it in, that's definitely a Studio Ghibli movie because it has the qualities and the aesthetic of a Studio Ghibli movie, but it's like right there in the middle. The next movie is going to be Grave of the Fireflies. This movie is so sad. It made me cry. I was straight up not having a good time with this movie. When I started watching it, I was expecting again something very Studio Ghibli. No. So I'm warning you, if you are sensitive and you don't like to see stuff that are very sad, just skip this one. I wrote down how they eat all the candies and even make a tea out of it. Sad face. It keeps you in an emotional roller coaster of a very sad scene, and then we have an optimistic scene, then we have another very sad scene, and then we have a very hopeful scene. So you're always like going up and down with your emotions with this movie. I gave it a 6.5 out of 10, but only because it's so sad. I think this is the only Studio Ghibli movie that I don't know where to place it in the categories that I made, because even though it's very much like that's definitely a Studio Ghibli film, the story itself, it's not very Studio Ghibli. I think this movie is in a category of its own, the category being sad. Okay, going to a more lighter movie, we have My Neighbor Totoro. I wrote down very entertaining in a Tom and Jerry type of way, a bit of Alice in Wonderland, a bit of Mary Poppins, beautiful animation that represents children's imagination, beautiful representation of the countryside or living in the countryside. The only bad note that I wrote down is ending could have been a little bit more exciting, but overall I gave it an 8 out of 10. Starting this movie, I didn't expect it to be as exciting and as magical as it was, so it definitely, like, throughout the movie, it just took a twist for the better for me. Now the next movie is Kiki's Delivery Service. Let me read you my notes. I wrote, she's a witch, love. Has a cat, love. I was loving this movie. Everything that they were presenting in this movie, I was eating it up. Here I wrote, really like how they animate the wind hitting the fabric, and they do it in almost every movie. I really like that. I wrote down here again, the look or view from above. The creator must really like looking from above or the sky. Also, another thing I wrote down is that I really like how she was so culturally shocked and how different a life can be when you move from the countryside to the city, all the paperwork, all the new rules that you now need to learn, and how different it can be from home. Because this, I feel, is like a very universal experience that people have. If you move from one side of the country to the other, or from one country to another country, you can experience this type of like cultural shocks. I really like that analogy of Kiki not being able to fly with the analogy of when you have an artistic block or a creative block. Also, something very real that they included in the movie is how things can go so wrong when you work for the first time. Another thing I wrote down is that I liked how the image of being a witch wasn't related to being evil at all. Overall, this movie is a 10 out of 10. I really liked it from the beginning to the end. I didn't know it was gonna be this good. I think maybe because of the title, like Kiki's Delivery Service, I was like, okay. This movie for me is under my Oscar winners. She's an Oscar winner for me. 10 out of 10. So the next movie is going to be Only Yesterday. Let's go to the notes that I wrote. Love the 90s animation, similar color palette to Ocean Waves. We haven't talked about that movie, but we will get into it. A lot of the background sceneries look like a watercolor painting, which I really love. If somebody here watching this movie is from Japan or just know this fact about Japan, I had a question. Do they really don't have pineapples in Japan? Or what's going on with the pineapples over there in Japan? The other thing I wrote down is very nostalgic and very good at representing how is it like when you like a boy in school. Also, they have a scene where she starts flying or floating after she talked to him. I think this was a very accurate scene when it comes to being a girl and liking a boy. It's a good representation of that. Another thing they do very well in this movie is that they represent the emotions very well. I really got sad when she talks about how pretty much her dad killed her acting dreams. And the other thing I wrote down is that it's a very slice of life type of movie. Overall, I gave it a 6 out of 10, and I'm gonna place it in so underrated. The next movie in our list is Porco Rosso. The first thing I wrote down is that I love the multilingual intro. Again, aerials. The people behind Studio Ghibli, they love airplanes. I know it. The best scene was when he saw all the airplanes of his dead friends. I think that scene was very beautifully done. but overall I gave it a 2.5 out of 10. I was not feeling this movie at all. I don't know if this is a fan favorite from Studio Ghibli. I was not feeling it. Almost fell asleep. That's the category. Almost fell asleep. The next movie is Ocean Waves. I really like the 90s animation. I really like that. I also really like the color palette that the movie had. It was a very cool tones, a lot of blues, purples, very cool color palette. Another thing that I wrote down is that it has a heavy Japanese feeling to the movie. Also, the sound of the crickets was very satisfying. And I also really like the small frames as transition to another scene. Zoom out, zoom in. The thing that I was not feeling is like, what was the story? I gave it a 3 out of 10. I'm gonna place it in almost fell asleep. I think it was aesthetically, visually pleasing. The story itself, 3 out of 10. Almost fell asleep. The next movie we're going to talk about is Poko. If you have watched Over the Hedge or Wall-E, this movie has very similar vibes to those movies. Transformation, question mark, and there's this scene of a testicle. I was laughing. And also another thing I really like is how the animals go to war against the humans, pretending to be spirits or transform into spirits. I really like that. I also really like that it was very raw and honest when it comes to talking about animal behavior, like very Animal Planet. This is how it is. It's not cute. And the drawings or the animation of Operation Goblin were so beautiful and so magical. I think that was my favorite thing of the whole movie. I also like that it had a very traditional and surreal Japanese art style. Also, another thing I noticed was that the sounds of laughter for the goblins were terrifying. But it added that feeling to the scene. It was very trippy, and overall I was not expecting a movie like this at all. It doesn't look like your typical Studio Ghibli movie, but it's so good. I want to place it in under so underrated, but because it's also one of my personal favorites, for me, it's an Oscar winner. I really enjoyed this movie. Like, I cannot tell you how much I liked it. And I feel like when I hear people talking about Studio Ghibli movies, they never mention this movie. You should watch it. Like, it's a must watch. It's underrated, but it's just so good. For real. I gave it a 9 out of 10. So the next movie we're going to talk about is Whisper of the Heart. I must say, this one I watched it in English. Just want to let you know. Because I don't know if maybe it's a little bit different in Japanese. Every movie that I watch, I try to watch it in the original language and with English or Spanish subtitles. I don't like watching dub, but this one I watched it in English. 90s animation, very similar to Ocean Waves. I really like the train scene with the cat. I think it's a very good representation of cats' behavior. That's just how cats are. I love them. Something I noticed is that the clock says porco rosso. I love those little like Easter eggs. When I notice it by myself, I feel so smart. Another thing that I noticed is that is it from this movie that we get the low-fi studying girl? Do you remember that playlist? And I love how they did that animation of the girl and the baron looking for the crystals. I really like that scene. One of the things that I found so real of the movie was that fear that the girl has of showing her art or showing her craft, like putting herself out there. That fear of being perceived and being judged, I thought it was so real and very well executed in the movie. So I gave it an 8 out of 10, and I'm gonna place it on It Took a Turn for the Better, because again, this was another one of those Studio Ghibli movies where I was not too sure about what was gonna happen, but then how it turned out, I really liked it. Now the next movie is Princess Mononoke. It has Avatar Save the Planet type of vibes. The women are very slay. The wolves talking telepathically reminded me of Twilight, even though I think this movie obviously came before. And Ashitaka really fought for Princess Mononoke till the end. Give the deer his damn head back. I wrote down that the best part of the movie were the last 30 minutes, and I think this is what a lot of Studio Ghibli movies have, is that the movie is like very slow paced, and then towards the end something drastic happens. I know this movie is a fan favorite, but for me I gave it a 7 out of 10, and again, not a bad movie at all. It's just that of all the movies, there were other movies that I liked more than this one. I'm gonna place it in it took a twist for the better, because again, towards the end, I think, like I said, those last 30 minutes were the best of the movie. My neighbor, the Yamadas. The first thing that you notice once you start watching this movie is that it has a very different animation. Very similar to Snoopy, if you will. And this was another movie that I watched in English, just another FYI. It was giving existential crisis. It was giving the meaning of life. Another thing that I wrote down was that it sounded like a couples therapy type of movie, especially when there's that scene of the boat, that it kind of represents the hardships of life and how couples sticking together can overcome anything. It was giving very much that. It had a good representation on how a family should approach their problems and try to resolve them. And something that you will notice if you watch this movie is that it's almost like a bunch of short stories put together. I wrote down that it's a good movie to watch if you're wanting to start a family. But overall, I gave it a 4 out of 10, maybe because I am not in that headspace of family, this and that, and that's how I perceive that movie. I just think that I wasn't the target audience for the movie, so for me it was a little bit boring. That's the category I'm gonna place it in. The next movie we're going to talk about is Spirited Away. I don't want to be biased, but let's talk about it. The first thing I learned from this movie is that you should never eat unattended, free food. Never do that. Never. Because remember, nothing is free, ever. The boy with the bob really ate. The tiny fluffy coal balls are so cute. I love them. The dragon, girl. I don't know if it's because I love dragons in general, but whenever I see a dragon or they add a dragon to a story, I like it like 10 times better. That dragon is so cool, and the color palette of the boy and the dragon go so well together. I love. And No Face is such a cutie patootie. I don't care what you say. No Face is such a cutie patootie. He did nothing wrong. And the train scene outsold. And the falling scene, girl. As you might expect it, this is one of my favorite Studio Ghibli movies. 10 out of 10, my Oscar winner. Now, the cat returns. Something I noticed is that the art style of humans seems a little bit different from usual. A theory that I had, I don't know if this is true, it's just something that I thought of, is that if she died when the truck passed and she didn't realize that she died, and that's why she can talk to cats. Something that I didn't like was when she was being mean to the cats. I didn't get it, because if cats bring me cat tails, like the plant, as a gift, and they follow me around and they start talking to me, telling me like, oh, come with us, this and that, trust, I will follow those cats. Trust, I will be so happy if that happened to me. So I didn't like when she was being mean to those cats, no. But then things started to get crazy when they were talking about marrying a cat. I was like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? So overall, I gave this movie a 7.5 out of 10, and I'm gonna place it in It Took a Twist for the Better. I don't know, maybe I think I'm biased because it's a movie about cats. I liked it. The next movie I'm going to talk about is definitely a fan favorite, Howl's Moving Castle. Some of the notes that I took were the animation feels very comforting. Something that I really love about this movie is the magical elements of the movie. An observation that I did was that Howl is a drama queen.
Sophie! You sabotaged me! Look what you've done to my hair! Look!
Yeah, so overall I gave this movie an 8 out of 10, and in the categories I'm going to place it in
So underrated.
The next movie we need to talk about is Tales from Earthsea. Girl, I wrote down that it has a biblical feeling to it because of the wardrobe and the color palette that they choose to use. It looks similar to those cartoons that tell Bible stories. So that's why I wrote down that it had a biblical feeling to it. Another observation that I made was that the dragons are drawn in the Western style. 26 minutes into the movie and I still don't know what the movie is about. What is the objective? What is the goal? What are we looking for? Are we looking for something? Or are we looking for someone? Like, what is it about? Overall, I gave it a 1 out of 10.
It is so bad, I want to give you a 0, but that's not possible. So I give you a 1.
Going from Howl's Moving Castle to this movie is insane. Insane. The next movie we're going to talk about is Ponyo. He's like a half human, half fish, Little Mermaid type of vibes in this movie. Ponyo's mom was so beautiful, that scene, loved it. And I really like the scene where the city goes underwater. It felt very magical. Overall, I think it's a cute story for kids. Very aesthetically pleasing. So I give it an 8 out of 10 and I'm gonna place it under so underrated because yes, I've seen it here and there under the Studio Ghibli movies. I think it's popular but not as popular as the other more popular movies. Does that make sense? Now the next movie we're going to talk about is The Secret World of Arrietty. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Love the cat. Yes, I'm a cat person, so when I see a cat I love the cat. Yes. As soon as I saw the little people, I thought of the people from Epic. It was giving the Who's. It was giving Bugs Life. I really like the detail that the sounds are so amplified, and maybe because they are very tiny. I thought that the crow scene was so funny. Overall, I thought it was a very sweet story and I wish there was a second part. I don't know, it kind of left me hanging a little bit. I gave it an 8 out of 10 and I'm gonna place it under so underrated. So the next movie we're going to talk about is From Up on Poppy Hill. An observation that I made, the animation looks slightly different. It's the same, but it looked like more clear. I love that they mentioned a philosophy group and they mentioned Nietzsche.
遠慮するな。実存主義について語ろうかな。それともニーチェかな。
I felt so smart when I knew what they were talking about. You think it's a love story? Plot twist. They're siblings. I gave this one a 6 out of 10 and I'm gonna place it on there.
Definitely a Studio Ghibli film.
So the next movie we're going to talk about is The Wind Rises. Something I found out about this movie is that it's based in a true story. So again, we have planes, we have air, we have flights. It had a very French and Italian vibe and you can get that from the music. The boss of the main character in the movie reminded me of Edna Mode. It reminded me also of Ratatouille because he kept talking to his idol or to his role model, kind of like how Ratatouille kept talking to Chef Gusteau in his imagination. It had a similar vibe like that. And it felt like the first half of the story was him trying to be an engineer and then the second half of the story is a love story. Another thing that I wrote down is that it's very good at showing the perspective of an engineer, because when normal people see the airplane, they just see their airplane, but when the engineer sees the airplane, he like notices the bits and pieces of the airplane, if that makes sense. Something that happened is that after you watch this movie, you feel like you know a lot about airplanes because they go very into detail when it comes to the airplane crafting. So I gave this one a 7 out of 10 and I'm gonna place it under that's definitely a Studio Ghibli film. Like I said, the airplanes reoccurring theme of Studio Ghibli and then the love story that Studio Ghibli likes to do, the art style, everything felt very Studio Ghibli coded. The next movie we're going to talk about is The Tale of Princess Kaguya. The first main difference that I noticed is the animation style. This one has a very Japanese traditional style, not your typical Studio Ghibli animation style. Very similar to My Neighbor, the Yamadas, that type of animation. kind of like that. I love, again, this one is very fantasy coded. She came out of a bamboo plant and she's transformed into a human. I love that. Something that I wrote down is that it could have been an hour-long story. I think it was too long. Like they could have tell the same story in a shorter amount of time. And also I wrote down that they could have focused more on the men and how they tried to deceive her and how she found out, because I thought that bit of the story, like she knowing that they were playing games, was so interesting, but they kind of brushed too quickly over it. And I think it would have been more interesting if they showed the audience how those guys got those objects and then how she found out that they were trying to play her. So overall, I gave this movie a 5 out of 10. I'm gonna place it under that's definitely a Studio Ghibli movie, even though it doesn't look like a Studio Ghibli movie. Once you see the story, you can tell that it's a Studio Ghibli movie. So the next movie I want to talk about is When Marnie Was There. Studio Ghibli classic animation. This story, I don't know, the plot felt a little bit flat and uninteresting for me. I gave it a 4 out of 10. I'm gonna place it under. Almost fell asleep. The next movie is Earwig and the Witch. Girl, the animation is totally different. It's like a 3D animation, and honestly it was giving Uncanny Valley. And the plot being that this girl is adopted to basically be a slave. It's kind of insane. Overall, I thought that the story was good, but the animation killed it. If this same story was told in the classic Studio Ghibli animation, with those magical elements that Studio Ghibli gives to their movies, and made it such a better movie overall. My favorite character was the cat, obviously, and it also reminded me of Monster House. The ending was kind of like a cliffhanger, and something that I noticed is that the story has a lot of loopholes. So it could have been better though. Like they could have fixed this movie, like I said, if they made it in the original Studio Ghibli animation. Girl, I would be telling another story. 4 out of 10, but burn it. Now, for the last movie of Studio Ghibli, it came out this year, The Boy and the Heron. I really wanted to watch the English version of this because I saw a lot of people saying on TikTok that Robert Pattinson as the Heron was marvelous. But I watched the Japanese version. At the beginning, you get very similar vibes from The Grave of the Fireflies. And when they said that the boy's name was Mahito, this was the second Studio Ghibli movie that made me cry. When he was dreaming about his mom. One tear here, one tear here, rolled down my face, okay? Throughout the movie, I was like, is Mahito tripping or is the heron really talking? And honestly, it was a little bit of both. The new woman, Mahito's stepmother, is his aunt. So Mahito's mom died. His mom had a sister, and Mahito's dad decided to go with his dead wife's sister. So when Mahito's new stepmother has a son, which she's pregnant, Mahito and the kid not only are going to be brothers, but they're also going to be cousins. When I saw the heron's human form, he was giving Danny DeVito. Another thing that I noticed, the birds in this movie are tweaking. And a conclusion that I kind of made was that Mahito's mom was kind of like Calcifer or like a firebender. And then Mahito's aunt or stepmom is very similar to an airbender. I don't know. That was the vibes that I was getting from that. I gave it a 7 out of 10, and under the categories, I'm going to place it under It Took a Turn for the Better. Apparently, that's going to be the last Studio Ghibli movie ever. So this is my take and my opinion on the Studio Ghibli movies. Remember that this is my opinion. This is not a fact. You can have a different opinion from me. You can say that Kiki's delivery service is trash, and that's fine. That's your opinion. It's one of my favorites, but we can have different opinions, okay? So don't get too upset if one of your favorite movies, I gave it a ranking that you didn't like. That being said though, I would love to hear which one is your favorite and why. Thank you for watching this video. I had a lot of fun watching all these movies for the first time, and I'll see you when I see ya. Bye! Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Who am I?